Good. Well, welcome everyone for signing in, joining. My name is Manny, and welcome to Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. The point of these conversations, my friends who are joining in, is to continue our work to civically engage the public, especially in this time of need. That's what we're all about. And today we are joined by the incredible Eliza Nemser, who's a friend of mine, who also went to the same college as me. So we have the college connection, and she's been putting on all these incredible events for climate candidates at Manny's since we opened, and it's such an honor to be in conversation with her. Eliza, thank you for joining us today.
Well, Manny, thank you for having me, and it's nice to see your face.
I know, it's a little bushy right now.
It is. That's the way. Thanks for doing this too. I think this is huge. I want to send love to everyone who's suffering right now.
Yes.
Physically and mentally and economically. This is just surreal.
Yes.
And yeah.
No, please.
Shout out to the heroes, right? I mean, the ones on the front lines in the emergency rooms, stocking grocery shelves.
Yes.
We owe everything to them. And this is thematic. Shout out to the electeds who are showing bold public health leadership right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we keep going, I just want to ask everyone who's a participant to please wave their hand. There's a little hand raise button that you can do. I want to see who's here. So raise your hand. Press the raise hand button. Hi. Okay, thank you so much. I see some folks. I see Lauren and Eric, Emily, PJ, Zach Malamed's in the house, Daniel, Heather, Joanna, Alfredo, Earl, Tyler, Cal, Michael, lots of fun people. Thank you all so much for being here. Today, the title of today's conversation is Elevating Climate Candidates, a Big Lever on Climate. Eliza and I are going to speak for 15 minutes, and then we have a special guest who's coming in, which we can't mention just yet, but we're just going to talk for 15 minutes, and then we have a special guest, so get excited about that. And after that, you'll be able to ask questions in the Q&A box, but feel free to start writing your questions right now on how to elevate climate candidates. So Eliza, let's get right to it. What motivates you to focus on elevating climate candidates? I don't know a lot of people who are devoting specifically to elevating climate candidates. So why are you doing this?
Okay. Well, look, as we're seeing right now in real time, there is literally nothing more important than electing leaders who prioritize public health and who embrace policy based on science. So this acute public health crisis has tons of parallels with the climate crisis, right? Also a public health crisis, also a global emergency, also unfolding crazy fast. I feel like we could have called this conversation Elevating Public Health Champions. It's basically synonymous with climate candidates. So I come at this from science. I am a scientist. I'm a PhD geoscientist. And I used to work on earthquakes. But when we elected Trump and he appointed Scott Pruitt to head up the EPA, I switched gears. I realized, one, the climate crisis is way scarier than earthquakes, and two, it's a political problem, right? We can't science our way out of it. So I started paying attention to environmental politics, and I learned about LCV scores. Manny, do you know about LCV scores?
I do not know what an LCV score is. I don't know what that is. What is it?
Okay, so it's wild, and you need to Google it. Everyone should. Okay. So the League of Conservation Voters basically.
Oh, okay. You were just using the fancy acronym. I know what the League of Conservation Voters is.
The League of Conservation Voters, they track all members of Congress. They track their votes on environmental legislation. And basically, they give them a score from 0 to 100. And this is like not a bell curve distribution, right? There ends up being this ridiculously sharp bimodal distribution, like a huge spike with very low scores and a huge spike with very high scores. It'll blow your mind. Like about half of our members of Congress have an abysmal LCV score, like from 0 to 10%, and about half have a stellar score, right? Often above 95%. So my takeaway was like, wow, if votes on environmental legislation, right, most of which is specifically designed to protect public health from pollution, if those votes are a numbers game, then literally to protect the survival of our species, the path is to elect more legislators who prioritize public health.
So how do you actually do that? What are your strategies? How do you actually elevate climate candidates? Because obviously, there's so many different major social justice issues and public issues that people care about and think about. How do you make sure that it doesn't get lost in the soup of everything else? And how have you been strategizing the way to elevate climate candidates?
Right. Okay. Well, I think there's a lot of people for whom climate is a tremendously high concern, right? And a lot of people are, watching their carbon footprint very carefully and pressuring corporate action. All of that stuff's incredible. I think not enough people are paying attention to how big of a lever electoral politics is. And like, now's the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in the throes of a climate emergency. Again, individual action, great. Corporate action, great. We need bold federal policy to address the climate crisis. And the United States, needs to show leadership on it globally. So it's a numbers game. To pass bold climate action legislation, we need the votes. And we now have the votes in the House with some kind of reasonable margin. But currently in the Senate, the votes against climate action, like the obstructionist votes, outnumber the votes for climate action. This is very straightforward. Climate action can take the form of tipping the scales there. So, I'm focused right now on Senate races as the big lever on climate action for this cycle. But
why?
I also want to say,
why Senate?
Because what I just said, literally right now, the number of obstructionist votes outnumber the number of climate action votes. No matter what happens at the top, if we don't have the votes to pass to support climate action, if Mitch McConnell still has control of the Senate, we're in really big trouble. But I'll say, we also need to keep the House majority. There are a lot of awesome endangered House members who are great climate champions. There's Sharice Davids in Kansas. We know a lot of these guys, Xochitl Torres Small in New Mexico, Andy Kim in New Jersey, Josh Harder right here in California. It's very important to keep those climate champions in office. And obviously we need a climate champion in the White House, right? I'm excited to have a nominee that we can rally around, and I'll leave that. And then all the way up
you're gonna leave that right where it is.
I'm gonna leave that.
You're gonna leave it right over here. You're gonna put it right over there. Okay.
Yeah. And state legislatures, super important for climate action. All the way down ballot, there's a very cool project through Resistance Labs where they're going to the source of emissions and they're cultivating clean energy champions for oversight boards at municipal utilities and rural electric co-ops across the country. So that's super cool.
Oh my God.
And for people who that piques their interest, and it should, you can email Daisy, DAISY, at Resistance Labs and learn more about that effort. So all up and down the ballot, we need climate champions, but I am focused on the United States Senate. To me, that's the biggest lever for climate action.
Got it. Okay, so let's get into just brass tacks, how the people on this call vote for you. Before we get to our super secret special cyber civic guest that we have, who's jumping on in 4 minutes. We have a super secret guest. Can't tell you who, but tune in for that. And if you have questions, you can start typing them in the Q&A button. How can the people who are listening here, how can they engage on elevating climate candidates in a productive and impactful way?
Okay. Number one, I think it's really important to use a nonpartisan framework. I think it's a key strategy. So I talk about elevating climate champions, elevating public health champions, pro-science candidates. I don't bring in party politics. The fact that public health leadership has become partisan is a huge part of the problem. And that was a successful strategy on behalf of climate deniers. And I refuse to reaffirm that narrative. So I think everyone needs to be really cautious about. We need all hands on deck to address this, and alienating friends, family, colleagues, would-be supporters with partisan rhetoric isn't going to help. So ditching partisan rhetoric also clears a path for more people, including scientists, who see that this is a political problem, but are reluctant to engage in electoral politics. The other part of this kind of paradigm of being less inflammatory is to focus on clear-cut races, right? Ones where there's one clear climate champion. It's just lower risk and it's less likely to ruffle.
Where do people figure out what those races are?
Here we go. We're there.
Oh, I asked the right question.
We're there. Let's talk about the Senate. Okay, so the idea is to focus on strategic Senate races, right? So we technically need to replace 3 or 4 climate action obstructionists in the Senate with climate champions. And we have 1 or 2 vulnerable climate champions in the Senate. So it makes sense to think about like 5, 6, 7 of the most flippable strategic races. So I'm going to name them. And there's some room for disagreement, but there's like a lot of consensus. The top tier is Arizona. That's Mark Kelly, the former astronaut. Colorado, North Carolina, Cal Cunningham, awesome climate champion. and Maine, Sarah Gideon. That's top tier. Second tier, now we're in
Wait,
the
so just to repeat, it's Colorado,
Colorado.
Maine, North Carolina, and Arizona.
Yeah.
Okay.
Second tier. Now we're in Georgia with the Reverend Warnock race that Stacey Abrams just endorsed. Iowa, Teresa Greenfield, Kansas, and Montana. So if you're inclined to be more optimistic, there's more. I love Jamie Harrison in South Carolina. Al Gross is a very exciting candidate in Alaska with stunning climate-themed ads. James Mackler in Tennessee, and Amy McGrath in Kentucky. There's other races that need to shake out more and have a little bit more of a more complicated primary. But
real inside baseball question though, real quick though. Since Steve Bullock just recently announced that he's gonna run for Montana Senate, do you think that makes it a lot more likely that we might win?
So I just put that in the tier 2. I think that's right now
Yeah.
in tier 2. It is.
It's not tier 1?
I think
No.
it's a really important race to focus on. It's winnable. It's very winnable.
Okay.
I'm gonna talk now like tactics. So we've got specific races, and now we have to look at our tools, right? So they're like the classic tools to engage in electoral politics. You get involved with grassroots orgs, you text bank, postcards, phone bank, write checks. But the trick is, and I think everyone who's listening is a candidate for this, think about next level engagement that the climate crisis demands, right? So more than voting and making phone calls, we need to step up and rally and inspire others in our communities to join us in these classic actions. So it's not a one size fits all thing. I think everyone needs to look at their own sphere of influence, right? Maybe it's just family, coworkers, friends, book club. Maybe you have hundreds or thousands of followers on Twitter or Instagram. The idea is think about your sphere of influence, reference the classic ways, and think about how you can punch above your weight, right? So rather than text banking, host a text banking party. Inspire others.
Right. Be a community organizer. Actually bring people together around this stuff.
Everyone has to step up. And I think you can't just be vague, like, let's get behind this climate candidate. You need to draw specific races into the conversation. So, pick one. Say, we're going to go all in for Sarah Gideon in Maine. Are you with me? Like Cal Cunningham. Pick a state that strikes a chord, or an incumbent who's maybe done something particularly egregious.
Right. Well, I have more questions for you.
Yep.
But do you think it's time?
I think it's time. I mean, we need to talk about Give Green, which I think is a really big tool in my tool belt and everyone's. It's a portal, just like Act Blue. Like all the money goes to the candidate. But if you send money through the Give Green portal, and maybe you need to make sure that all the attendees see that link, the money all goes to the candidate, and it goes with a message about climate being a priority. So the idea is to build and demonstrate the political power of climate concern as a motivating factor for political giving. It kind of turns money into like a 1-2 punch, right? So you're going to send money anyway, and climate action is a priority. Why not send that message by giving through Give Green? To me, not using Give Green is a missed opportunity for people who are really passionate about climate action.
All right, in our final couple of minutes, let's take a couple questions from folks who are in. If you have a question for Eliza, type it in the Q&A. Go ahead and type in your questions now to the Q&A bucket if you have questions for Eliza on how to elevate climate candidates, especially in this time of shelter in place. Go ahead and type your questions in. We have 3 minutes, so we probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. Or ideas, or even if there are candidates that you want to kind of bring to Eliza's attention that because I know she does a lot of research, but I'm sure she's always looking for new candidates to help elevate. I have a quick question while people are typing theirs in, which is like, how do you choose? So you just mentioned a bunch of Senate races and their House races. How do you choose which candidate you want to get excited about? Is it, do you like suggest like geographic proximity, what state's closest to you, or age or gender, or how do you how do you match make?
The point is that you have to feel passionate, right? You have to get the link between climate action and elevating these candidates. And then once you get it, I mean, you have to it has to come from a passionate place, and that way you inspire other people around you to focus on these races. I feel like you just, whatever strikes a chord, whether it's a state or a specific candidate, or but you know, I think it's really important to be strategic. I'm seeing a question from Hope.
Right.
How can
Yes.
we talk
Hope. Yes.
climate during the pandemic? How do we talk climate during the pandemic? You know, honestly, I think the same way we should have been talking climate all along pre-pandemic, which is through the frame of human health. I think it's so underutilized, and you just don't hear it enough in the discourse. Climate change impacts human health. I think, you know, focusing on how human health is impacted. Air pollution kills millions of people every year. Air pollution is exacerbated because of climate change, and air pollution exacerbates climate change. Talking about the link between human
Right.
health and environmental degradation, environmental pollution, heat-related illness is a huge silent killer. I think
Right.
you really have to make it personal. So we're talking about, I think, talk about climate in terms of public health. And that's the same, we're living out an acute public health crisis. We feel it more than ever. So it's just, and you know, it's not going to be compressed into a couple months or a year the way this pandemic will be. But it's still pretty darn compressed. I mean, we
Right.
have a decade, and that's it.
Right. So we have to close, but before we do, I just want to repeat something that you said earlier, and you've actually said a couple times in this conversation, which is that crisis makes us transform. Just like how it changed your course because of the election of Donald Trump. We're in the midst of a crisis. Crisis has the ability to allow us to transform our thinking, our perspective, and our society. And so it is an opportunity. Eliza, I want to thank you so much for the work that you do. And I want to thank you all for coming here. A quick plug. Please consider supporting Manny's in this time of need. We've had to shut down and close all of our programming. There's a link at the bottom of your screen. It's joinit.org/o/Manny's. And please become a sponsor. It's $36 a month, and it is exactly the support that we need right now to stay open and to continue to do our work. Please, I'm going to resend the Give Green link for Cal Cunningham to the bottom of this. So there's 2 links to click on. There's Give Green for Cal Cunningham, and there's joinit.org for Manny's. Please tag us at Welcome to Manny's on all socials and help us spread this message. Eliza, my love to you and your family. You're doing so much. You're holding so many people up right now. You're working full time. You're supporting your family. You're brilliant. You're participating in this. And I just want to thank you and appreciate you and send you grace and strength and all the power that you need. Okay?
Thank you, Manny. You too. And you have just been such a hero in inspiring a higher level of civic engagement. And I think that's exactly what I'm trying to do. And highlight the link between civic engagement, electoral commitment and engagement, and climate action. But you have been a role model for a lot of us, and you've inspired a lot of people. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. And before we close, there's just one last thing, which is we have the most amazing team at Manny's. We have 3 folks left. We have Sam Favela, Jupiter Peraza, and Ram Olivares. And the 3 of them and myself have been working round the clock to get these Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. So I want to publicly thank our team, Sam, Ram, and Jupiter. Thank you for all the hard work. All right, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Keep fighting.
Everyone stay well.